Oliver Twist was born in a workhouse. His mother was brought there late at night by the overseer's order. She was found lying in the street. She had walked some distance, for her shoes were worn to pieces, but where she came from, or where she was going to, nobody knew. As Oliver gave this first proof of the free and proper action of his lungs, the patchwork coverlet, which was carelessly flung over an iron bedstead, rustled. The pale face of a young woman was raised feebly from the pillow, and a faint voice imperfectly articulated the words, "Let me see the child," and I. The surgeon deposited it in her arms. She imprinted her cold white lips passionately on its forehead, passed her hands over her face, gazed wildly round, shuddered, fell back, and died. Oliver cried lustily. If he could have known that he was an orphan, left to the tender mercies of churchwardens and overseers, perhaps he would have cried the louder. The parish authorities magnanimously and humanely resolved that Oliver should be farmed, or, in other words, that he should be dispatched to a branch workhouse under the parental superintendence of an elderly female, Mrs. Mann, a woman of wisdom and experience. She knew what was good for children, and she had a very accurate perception of what was good for herself. So she appropriated the greater part of the weekly stipend, 7 halfpenny per head per week, to her own use, and consigned the rising parochial generation to even shorter an allowance that was originally provided for them. It cannot be expected that this system of farming would produce any very extraordinary or luxuriant crops. Oliver Twist's 9th birthday found him a pale, thin child, somewhat diminutive in stature and decidedly small in circumference. But nature, or inheritance, had implanted a good sturdy spirit in Oliver's breast.
Goodness gracious, is that you, Mr. Bumble, sir? Susan, take Oliver and them two brats upstairs and wash them directly. My heart alive, Mr. Bumble, how glad I am to see you, surely. No, only think of that I should have forgotten that the gate was bolted on the inside on account of them dear children. Walk in, sir, walk in, pray, Mr. Bumble, do, sir.
Do you think this respectful or proper conduct, Mrs. Mann, to keep the parish officers a-waiting at your garden gate when they come here on parochial business with the parochial orphans? Are you aware, Mrs. Mann, that you are, I may say, a parochial delegate and a stipendiary?
I'm sure, Mr. Bumble, that I was only a-telling one or two of the dear children, as is so fond of you, that it was you who were coming.
Well, Mrs. Mann, it may be as you say. It may be. Lead the way in, Mrs. Mann, for I have come on business and have something to say.
Now, don't you be offended at what I'm going to say. You've had a long walk, you know, or I wouldn't mention it. Now, would you take a little drop of something, Mr. Bumble?
No, not a drop, nor a drop.
I think you will. Just a little drop with a little cold water and a lump of sugar. Now, just a little drop.
What is it?
Why, it's what I'm obliged to keep a little of in the house to put in the blessed orphans' daffy when they ain't well, Mr. Bumble. It's gin. I'll not deceive you, Mr. B. It's gin.
Do you give the children daffy, Mrs. Mann?
Ah, bless them, that I do. Dear as it is, I couldn't see 'em suffer before me very eyes, you know, sir.
No, no, you could not. You are a humane woman, Mrs. Mann. And I shall take an early opportunity of mentioning it to the board, Mrs. Mann. You feel as a mother, Mrs. Mann. I drink to your health with cheerfulness, Mrs. Mann. And now, about business. The child that was half-baptized Oliver Twist is 9-year-old today.
Bless him.
And
Mr. Bumble.
notwithstanding a reward of £10, which was afterwards increased to £20, notwithstanding the most superlative, and I may say supernatural exertions on the part of this parish, we have never been able to discover who is his father or what was his mother's settlement, name or condition.
How comes he to have any name at all, then?
I invented it.
You, Mr. Bumble?
Aye, Mrs. Mann. We name our foundlings in alphabetical order. The last was a S. Swabble, I named him. This was a T. Twist, I named him. The next one comes will be Unwin, and the next Vilkins. I have got names ready-made to the end of the alphabet, and all the way through it again when we come to Z.
Why, you're quite a literary character, sir.
Well, perhaps I may be, Mrs. Mann. Oliver, now being too old to remain here, the board have determined to have him back into the house. I have come out myself to take him there. So let me see him at once.
I'll fetch him directly. Make a bow to the gentleman, Oliver.
Will you go along with me, Oliver?
Oliver was about to say that he would go along with anybody with great readiness, when, glancing upward, he caught sight of Mrs. Mann, who had got behind the beadle's chair and was shaking her fist at him with a furious countenance. He took the hint at once, for the fist had been too often impressed upon his body not to be deeply impressed upon his recollection.
Will she go with me?
No, she can't, but she'll come and see you sometimes.
This was no very great consolation to the child. Young as he was, however, he had a sense enough to make a feint of feeling great regret at going away. He burst into an agony of childish grief as the cottage gate closed after him. Wretched as were the little companions in misery he was leaving behind, they were the only friends he had ever known, and a sense of his loneliness in the great wide world sank into the child's heart for the first time. Oliver was taken to a workhouse run by a board of very sage, deep, philosophical men. They established the rule that all poor people should have the alternative, for they would compel nobody, not they, of being starved by a gradual process in the workhouse, or by a quick one out of it. For the first 6 months after Oliver Twist was removed, the system was in full operation. The number of workhouse inmates got thin, as well as the paupers, and the board were in ecstasies. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months. Wild with hunger, A council was held among the boys. Lots were cast who should walk up to the master after supper that evening and ask for more. And it fell to Oliver Twist. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stationed himself at the copper, his pauper assistants ranging themselves behind him. The gruel was served, and a long grace was said over the short commons. The gruel disappeared, and then the boys whispered to each other and winked at Oliver, while his next neighbours nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery. He rose from the table, and advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, said, somewhat alarmed by his own temerity,
Please, sir, I want some more.
What?
Please, sir, I want some more.
4 more? Do I understand that you are asking for more?
Yes, sir.
One day you will hang, boy. I know it.
Nobody controverted the prophetic opinion. An animated discussion took place by the members of the board. Oliver was ordered into instant confinement, and a bill was next morning pasted on the outside of the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist off the hands of the parish.